All right, I hope you guys are doing well. Hope you had a great weekend. Today we're going to finish up World War One. I know it's been a long chapter, but there's a lot of information to go over, and we'll probably talk a little bit more about it when the upcoming chapters. It kind of sets the stage of where we'll be going in the 1920s, ultimately how it leads to the Great Depression, and then World War One is actually a cause to World War Two, which we'll talk a little bit about today. All right, so first off, here's a bell ringer. So I'm going to put the grades in for the bell ringers and the project presentations today. So I know I wanted to try to get them over the weekend, but it didn't happen. So I will get them in today. No worries about that. So bell ringer for today. Describe how America was a key player in the Allied victory in Europe during World War I. So I'll give you a few seconds to write that down. You can pause the video like normal and write your response, and then I'll review it here soon. I'll give you a few seconds. Take a swig of my coffee. All right, there you go. So describe how America was a key player in the Allied victory in Europe during World War I. All right, so I had you do the battles projects. You guys did a very good job with that. I was pleased with it. I just gotta submit the grades with them with that assignment. But with the Allied victory, so obviously we know that America in 1917 getting involved in World War I. It took, obviously the sinking of Lusitania in 1915. America didn't join yet. We're still staying isolated. President Wilson wanted to stay out of this war as long as possible. Okay. And then the Zimmerman note, right? So this decrypted code that was sent from Germany to Mexico to try to persuade them in attacking the U.S. And Great Britain picked up on it, and they alerted us, the United States, of this happening and of this doing by Germany, which ultimately pushed the U.S. into war, okay, against Germany and the Central Powers. So we went on the side of the Allied powers. So with that, the U.S. had to create propaganda to try to promote the masses, the people in the United States, to support the war. And a lot of businesses, factories are creating war supplies and armaments and military equipment. Okay, our economy shifted from peacetime to wartime. All right, obviously we have industrialization occurring in the late 1800s. It was really picked up, and it was really increasing during this time of World War I, because all the countries in the world were dependent on American product. No longer the European countries. I mean, obviously, yeah, they were producing materials and war supplies, but not at the rate the United States was. Okay, they were seeing a lot of the devastation and destruction of World War I in Europe. Okay, in the United States, not so much. Okay, not so much. So we didn't see any type of attacks on our factories or our businesses or our industries. We could promote and really produce a lot of products and war supplies. All right, so with that, which will lead into the next chapter in 1920s, the United States is growing as this industrial power, as the number one industrial power in the world. And in 1917, we know that Russia, right, they left the war. They were going through their Russian Revolution, okay, this communist revolution, which we'll talk a little bit more about probably tomorrow and Wednesday with the Red Scare and how that's going to cause issues, lingering issues, even till today, I guess you could say, all right, with the threat of communism and socialism taking control. Okay. And with that, the Red Scare leading into McCarthyism in the 50s, okay, and even more, obviously, after World War I, is paranoia. Right. And with that, we talked about the Espionage Sedition Act as well, how the United States government was trying to control some sort of freedom of speech in the U.S. Obviously, you can't talk against the United States. You can't promote the enemy during the war. All right. So with that, the United States, the main thing, we're a strong industrial power, strongest in the world. We could supply the Allied powers with new armaments, weapons, supplies, when Germany was kind of limited. They're fighting a two-front war for a long time. Obviously, when Russia left, they could focus all their attention on the Western Front, and the U.S. was coming in with all these new supplies and armaments and manpower. Really, that was it. All right, we talked how the doughboys really weren't prepared for this type of fighting, okay, this trench warfare, but was just sheer numbers, optimism, And really, we were just new to the war. We were just new to the war. Many of our men and our soldiers were excited. Okay, we just blew out the trenches, the fronts, because we had manpower, and this really provided some sort of motivation for the Allied powers like France and Great Britain when they saw all these Americans coming, excited about the war. It gave them another wind, a second wind. Okay, and they keep them going. It's like when you're playing a game or something. You start off slow. Okay, well, it's real competitive. You're starting to slow down. You're getting tired, and then all of a sudden you get this kick of energy that you're just taking over, and that's pretty much what it was. The U.S. just had soldiers, had supplies, armaments to keep fighting when the Central Powers, Germany, didn't. Okay, they kind of felt the effects of the long-lasting war. Okay, which we're going to talk more about today of what's happening after the war and at the end. All right, so there's your bell ringer. I have that recorded down, and if you haven't seen the assignment for today, please check that out. We're going to have a test Friday. It's going to be a Google form. Okay, it's going to be a Google form. All right, so real quick, here's the 2 vocab terms for today: Treaty of Versailles and reparations. So make sure you write those 2 down. Those are the last terms. Okay, I should have enough time there. So Treaty of Versailles and reparations. We'll talk about that in the unit today, so have those vocab terms written down. All right, so with the battles, okay, these are some of the battles that you went over already, which that's why I like you doing the research for these battles. It gives you time to research an item. Okay, it gives you those skills to do that, and then we can move on with the lesson. So we're not spending all day on these battles. Okay, here's a couple of pictures of the war. We can see the United States coming in, and their optimism, their sheer manpower, just pushing the Central Powers to defeat. Okay. All right, so the end of the war in Europe. Okay. This political cartoon is really interesting. I think this is a good one. It depicts the ending of the war in great significance and impact, right? Because we see right here Germany. You can tell this is Germany because the helmet, right? You see the point on the helmet. Okay, we talked about that before with propaganda pieces. And you can see the sword, right? Look at the sword. It's chipped off, right? It's broken in half. This sword is supposed to represent Germany's strong military. We talked a lot about that since the Franco-Prussian War. How Germany was so far advanced militarily than any other country in the world. And then it took a lot of groupings, a lot of powers, a lot of countries to come together to defeat Germany because of their strong military, their advancements, their strategies, right? And overall, obviously, we know the war started in 1914. It's ending in 1918. Okay, so 4 long years. And we can see the Allied powers. These are the flags of the Allied powers. Obviously, there's a lot more than that contributed, but we want to talk about the main 4, the main 5, right, that were involved, okay, with Great Britain, France, the United States, right? Italy will later change sides, right, and Russia, okay, and how all these countries come together to try to put an end to Germany. And this political cartoon really shows and expresses the Treaty of Versailles and how Germany is defeated. You can see the smoke, the destruction in the background of what the war led. It's a very dark and gloomy picture. But in the right-hand corner, we see the Allied powers reigning supreme, that they are overarching Germany. So Germans, Austria-Hungary were worn out by the time the U.S. entered, which we know, and many of the Allied powers were really fueled by America's optimism and the industrial gains that they had. And then on November 11th, 1918, Germany surrendered. Okay, we know that as Veterans Day, right? We talked about that earlier. It was once called Armistice Day, but that was later changed to Veterans Day with President Eisenhower to support not only World War I, but World War II, and so on and so forth, all the wars that will later occur in American history. But everybody thought that this war would be it. This would be the war to end all wars. We all know that didn't happen. which we'll later talk how World War One was a cause to World War Two. All right, so here we go, 11, 11, 11, 18, right? So 11 a.m., 11th hour, 11th day, 11th month, World War One ended. Okay, the armistice. And how Veterans Day, obviously we know that. I said that a million times on that day. Okay, 11, 11, 11, right? 11th month. So 1918. But it took until 1919 where many of the world powers came together to try to solve and try to set maybe some sort of limits or restrictions after the war and try to finalize it. Okay, so in 1919, the Big Four met at Versailles, France. The Treaty of Versailles. All right, so with the Treaty of Versailles, this is a very significant treaty. Probably the most impactful, probably one of the most widespread and talked about treaty in world history, just because it was a failure. It didn't work. Right? At first, with the ending of the Great War, this was an awesome thing. Right? We defeated Germany, and we're moving forward. We can have peace all around the world. But with this Treaty of Versailles, it didn't do that. Okay, actually, it led to even a larger event, a larger war, and many times, many people say that this war was the most devastating event in world history. So in a way, I guess you could say this Treaty of Versailles did not bring peace. Okay, it was not really a treaty of peace negotiations. In war words, it was kind of a devastation. It was a significant event and a cause that pushed for World War II. In many eyes, it was an act of war, I guess you could say, against Germany. But make sure you remember these big four here. Okay, the big four. We have David Lloyd George of England, which we talked about. He's like the prime minister. Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Again, he's like the prime minister. Georges Clemenceau of France. Again, another prime minister. And then Woodrow Wilson from the United States. We know him as the president. Okay, so the big four will get together and talk about some sort of issues and how they're going to try to divide up Europe and how they're going to try to set limitations to Germany and essential powers to maybe try to prevent another war from happening, and how they're going to try to create new countries, right, of the Balkan region, where we know that Austria-Hungary was taking away some of these people's rights and freedoms to create their own country and express their culture the way they like. So the big four, make sure you remember these four guys. Okay, that's a key significant thing. Make sure you know these four guys here. All right, so, yep, the Great War is over. Newspapers all around. We're all excited. Okay, this is a victory for the United States. We know that the Spanish-American War was a huge impact for the U.S. as we were rising as that world power. Now, because of this war, the rest of the world was dependent on U.S. industry. Okay, we saw another victory, which, hey, we're the last power alive, really. All these European countries duking it out in Europe, weakening themselves, and here we are, really not affected. Yeah, we had loss. Yeah, we had casualties, but not near the landscape or the significance of what these European countries faced. All right, so the results of the war, 5 million Allied fighters and 8 million Central Powers were killed. Okay, this was devastating. The world's never seen a war like this ever, okay? And 6.5 million innocent civilians were killed. So this was not only just a army versus army, military versus military. A lot of people were caught in a crossfire with bombing runs and maybe acts against the two powers, destroying farmland, resources, industries, factories, a cause of a total war, right? Where even civilians, children, women were given guns to try to fight the opposition. 50,000 Americans were killed and 230,000 wounded in World War I. So, yes, that's a large number, but that's not comparable to what Germany lost, not what Great Britain, France, Russia. Okay, a lot of these powers lost way more. So with America, we really weren't affected by it. And actually, a lot of these deaths were from the Spanish flu, which was a virus that spread rampant all throughout the world, okay, at the end of World War I, which we'll talk more about tomorrow. Okay, and you can kind of compare it to what's going on today with COVID-19. All right, so with that, we see the results of the war, very devastating, a war never seen like this ever in American history and world history. Okay, obviously it's going to build up to another war, which is going to be even more devastating, World War II. All right, so Wilson's plan for world peace. President Wilson wanted World War I to end all wars. Okay, that was the slogan of it. This is the war to end all wars. He wanted peace. He wanted to try to Make sure that a war like this would never happen or ensue ever again. Okay. You focus on peace and freedom without war. Most nations do not want peace for all. Okay, which we'll talk about here soon with this Treaty of Versailles. But the 14 points, make sure you remember this. Wilson presents his 14 points. And the main one that I want you to know, which is the last one, is the League of Nations. Okay, the League of Nations was a set. It was a grouping. It was a way of trying to have all these countries come together and talk and dispute and make sure that they're all on the same page before another war happens. Okay, so as these countries are getting involved, okay, with one another, they have diplomats from each country to express their concerns, their issues with one another, to make sure that another war will never happen again. And real quick, with that, the League of Nations was Woodrow Wilson's idea. And it was a great idea, right? It's a predecessor to the United Nations, which was established after World War II. But the League of Nations, at the end of World War I, was something to try to prevent future war, where all these diplomats would come together, try to solve issues before a war would happen. And President Wilson presented this plan to Congress, presented this plan to European countries, which European countries all came together and joined. Good thing. Didn't last too long because the biggest player, the country that came up with the idea, didn't join. Go figure, the United States. President Wilson came up with this idea. Congress said, nope, we're not joining. And the reason because of that was because the Congress thought the United States should stay out of European conflict, stay out of European involvement. And many people believe that if the U.S. would have stayed, would have been involved in the League of Nations, then maybe World War II might not have happened. They would have been the person that kind of, would have been the country that kind of laid out the groundwork and tried to avoid any type of future warfare. But Congress thought it was in the best interest that the U.S. stayed out of it. All right, so we'll talk about this more tomorrow. Okay, with Sacco Vanzetti, the Red Scare. Okay, the Spanish influenza. More tomorrow on Wednesday. All right, so main thing I want you to know, too, here with the Treaty of Versailles, what this did to Germany. Okay, I'd like you to know this. I'm going to write it up on the board. Make sure I have this up. Give me 1 second here, guys. See if you can check this out. Okay, good. Obviously, it's not freedom, but I want to put this up here for you. All right, so the Treaty of Versailles, what this did to Germany. To Germany. Number one, what this did for Germany was it put the sole blame. It put the sole blame of the war on Germany. Okay, even though they didn't start it, right? We all know that Austria-Hungary, with Serbia, okay, with the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, that's what really kicked off this war. But because Germany was aggressive, because they had a strong military, because they were a threat to the rest of the Allied powers, right? They created that strong naval arms race against Great Britain. They had a strong military land army that compared and really put devastation towards France, right, with the Franco-Prussian War and even before that. Many of these countries that came together, the Allied powers, thought, well, we need to try to lay the law down on Germany. We need to try to do something to try to prevent them from ever rising to power again. So number one, the sole blame was placed on Germany. Okay, so this is what the Treaty of Versailles did to Germany. Number one, sole blame. Okay, number two, one of the biggest things was that they lost their borderland. Lost borderland. So to try to limit Germany's growth and try to limit their industrial gains, they try to limit their resources that were coming in. The best way to do that is to take land away from them. Okay, remember Alsace-Lorraine. All this Alsace-Lorraine. No, I'm just kidding. So all Alsace-Lorraine was taken away from Germany, right? Because of that was a gain from the Franco-Prussian War. France was upset with this. Okay, George Clemenceau really wanted to try to lay the law down on Germany and make sure that they never become a strong, dominant threat again. Same with David Lloyd George of Great Britain. He thought, you know what? Let's try to prevent Germany from rising to power. So Loss of land. Alsace-Lorraine was one of the biggest things. Okay, they also lost land on the eastern side, which created Poland. Okay, remember Prussia, that was on the eastern side. Okay, that was now taken away. Remember all the new innovations, all the new type of abilities of growth and industrial gains all came from that land. So this is obviously going to anger Germany. So sole blame, loss of borderland. Another thing, territorial losses. Territorial losses. Okay, so with imperialism, we talked about that. We discussed that a lot. All right, so with losing the territory, this was a huge issue for Germany because they no longer have resources, raw materials from other places all around the world. Okay, this is something that they needed to grow and becoming a strong industrial power. That's all gone. That's taken away. So territorial losses. Next one, restriction of military and loss of navy. All right, so remember, Germany's biggest asset, their biggest claim to fame was their military. And if that's taken away from them, guess what? There goes nationalism. Remember, that was one of the causes to World War One. That national pride's all taken away from Germany. Without a strong military, their navy, all right, their national pride is all taken away. Okay, no longer can they really protect themselves or have any type of advancement against a world power like France or Great Britain. And that's what France wanted, right? They wanted to make sure that Germany could never rise to power again, and that their military was restricted, and that they lost their really glory and their nationalism to take that and strip that away from them. And we know the loss of the Navy. Okay, no longer could they have a Navy. That was obviously Great Britain. Great Britain made sure that their Navy could never rise to power to challenge theirs ever again. So we can see this is not a great thing for Germany at all. Okay, and the last one, the big one. All right, the big one, reparations. All right, reparations. So if you want to pause that, write that down. We have sole blame of the war placed on Germany, loss of borderland of Germany, Alsace-Lorraine taken away, territorial losses in Africa, Asia, all these resources, raw materials that they can't really find in their borders, taken away. Restrictions of military and loss of navy. France, Great Britain, making sure that Germany can never rise to power and challenge them ever again. And then reparations. All right, reparations. So these are, a debt that Germany has to pay back to the Allied powers for the war destruction. Okay, the sole blame really to place on them, and to pay to rebuild the Allied powers. So I'm going to zoom this in for you, make sure you have that. So the Treaty of Versailles to Germany, sole blame, loss of territory, loss of borderlands, restricted military and loss of navy, and reparations. All right, real quick. All right, let's just summarize that. So the Treaty of Versailles, like I mentioned, was something that put devastation to Germany. This was something that put them in an economic recession and depression the world's never seen. We talk about the United States depression. Well, Germany's after World War One was 100 times worse. It was terrible. And this was all something that the Allied powers, specifically France and Great Britain, wanted to manage to try to make sure that Germany could never rise to this world power again, that they could never see any type of advancement, and that they could never see any type of growth to maybe be a competitor against them in Europe. And like I said before, this was one of the causes to World War II. This isn't going to last too long. Okay, there's somebody going to rise to power that's going to really toss this Treaty of Versailles to the side and make sure that Germany can become this dominant power again. Right? Without territory, without land, they have no resources, raw materials to build any type of finalized goods or make any type of military equipment or supplies. And then they're taking away their military and their navy, something they had a strong pride in for a long, long time. Okay, their nationalism, their national pride stripped from them. And then they have to pay this reparation. What's unique enough, it was all the way up until 2010 when Germany finally paid off the war debts from World War One, these reparations, which I think is pretty interesting. All right, so make sure you check out the video that I have posted on Google Classroom. All right, and with that, it just summarizes what we talked about with the Treaty of Versailles. And then make sure you check out Eyewitness History. This is a reading and questions that is due for tomorrow. And finally, here is the exam. The exam is going to be Friday. Okay, Friday, 12/11. All right, take care. See you later.